So you negotiated a trade deal, a rewrite of the NAFTA. And by the way, that kind of trade deal should be rewritten every decade, couple of decades or so. Everybody understands that. It was a good time to do it. We knew a lot more about trade among these countries. And it really did seem to be an improvement. I thought it was an improvement. It should be an improvement. Now, the guy you negotiated with violates the trade deal he negotiated with you. What can you possibly do next with someone who behaves like that?
Well, first of all, we're a resilient people. We're a resilient country. So are the Mexicans. We're working with great determination. I think you had part of the Prime Minister's speech yesterday. Mm-hmm. It's a remarkable time. The Prime Minister is going to be stepping down soon from his post. There'll be a newly elected leader of the Liberal Party, which is the government in power at the moment, on Sunday. So this is really Prime Minister Trudeau's last period in office. And I think his speech yesterday, he showed enormous determination and clarity. And in a speech that he gave and was him speaking to the Canadian people and speaking directly to the president, he indicated that this approach that the president is taking is wrong. It is illegal, and it's also just wrong because it adds costs and prices to everybody in an economy on both sides of the border, in fact, all sides of the border, that has brought huge benefit to our country and to the United States. And it is possible to have a trade agreement that actually allows everyone to do better. And that's what we've discovered. And we've worked at it since the 1980s. So we are going to continue to work with the administration to try to figure out what is it about this agreement that he now finds so offensive, but also to understand that, this is the time for renegotiation is a year from now. 2026 is the statutory time, the time in law when we're supposed to renegotiate the agreement. And we are ready to sit down at any table and negotiate, but we do need to create some sense of certainty and fairness in terms of how we all treat each other. And that, I think, is what's been lost. The statements the president's made about the 51st state, the references to Mr. Trudeau as the governor of Canada, these are not a joke. They never were a joke for me. I always thought they were deeply offensive and really strike at the heart of what it means to be a Canadian in this world. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people in Canada are stunned and then angry. And I think you're seeing that in the streets of Canada today. You're seeing a sense of deep frustration and deep anger. But I think the governments of Canada are going to continue to negotiate in good faith with the United States. And if it means going to a dispute settlement mechanism or to challenging the law in court, if that's what it takes, or we have to do that, that's, of course, something we can do. But I think above all, what we want to do is reach a fair and reasonable negotiation with the president and with his team. And that's something that we're still very willing to do.
My reading of the market yesterday, and reading of the market is always guessing.
Yeah, a little tricky. You get whiplash.
When things got really serious in the stock market, when Prime Minister Trudeau spoke, because the market hadn't heard from him. They knew the Trump game. They'd been through the Trump game before. They didn't believe Trump. They didn't believe Trump when he threatened the tariffs the first time around, and then he paused them, for a month. And they never expected him to impose these tariffs. They expected another pause, and then they went forward. And then they heard from Canada, and they heard a firmness from the Prime Minister that was clear and solid and strong and determined. And that's when the market said, "Oh, this is real. Canada's going to fight back, and Canada has very strong ammunition here."
Well, I mean, first of all, it is the Prime Minister leading the country, but it's also all the premiers
yes,
working at the provincial level. And we have a highly decentralized federation where the premiers, I was a premier at one time many years ago. And so there's a lot of power in the provinces to do stuff as well. And there's a lot of frustration, and it's shared not only geographically across the board in Canada, but it's shared across party lines. We have representatives of several different parties.
This has been unifying.
This has been an incredibly, I wouldn't just say unifying, I would say galvanizing. This is something that is galvanizing our country with enormous determination. And so what the Prime Minister's announced is a series of steps. You do this, we'll do this. And that's painful to do because it hurts us as much as it hurts the people who are being affected. But more importantly, I think the issue for us now is how do we get this thing back on track? What is it that's really behind it? It doesn't seem to be the fentanyl because Canada's not a huge source of fentanyl. We all agree that we have to take steps to reinforce the border. That's happening everywhere. And we understand the need to do that. And that's being done. So what is this really about? And it's the sense that this is such a moving target that the Prime Minister, I think he felt, well, we just have to do what we're going to do. And we have to get some clarity from the American government as to what is it going to take for you to understand that we don't accept this. And we have cars and integrated industries you've described. We have resources of all kinds. We have manufacturing all across the country. And it will affect American customers. Potash, for example. We have farmers in the United States, in the Midwest. Planting season, I know it doesn't feel like it today, but planting season is coming. And when it comes, they're going to need a lot of potash. They're going to need a ton of potash. And we have it, and we supply it every year reliably and on good economic terms with no taxes and no tariffs. And the President of the United States is saying, well, there's going to be a tariff on that. I think these are all things that don't make a lot of sense to us, but we're still good faith people. We want to be in a good partnership, and we value the partnership with the United States a great deal. I mean, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and so I know this country pretty well, and I think what's happening is just not right. And I think there's a lot of Canadians who feel the same way and who feel very, very strongly that we've got to find a way to fix this. And we're ready 24 hours to pick up the phone anytime and just sit down and figure out what is it going to take to get us to a longer term negotiating table for 2026. But let's take the uncertainty out of everything. It's not just markets. The most important market is the job market, and it's jobs. It's jobs for people. It's prices for people. And it's these things that create enormous uncertainty and unfairness for citizens on both sides of the border. We should stop this. And we can stop it. We can stop it.
Trying to do hiring and hiring planning in environments like this cannot do it. They don't know what the conditions are going to be 30 days from now.
Well, that's the situation with the 30 days. And the reason that even that is troublesome is because, and he knows this, the president knows this. He's an investor.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm positive. He's an investor. He's a smart investor.
He's ignorant of a lot.
I'm not going to use those words, Lawrence. You're going to.
I know you're not.
You're going to get me deeper into the mire than
I'm going to lean back here. Please proceed.
I just want to say that, you can't make an investment decision if you don't know what the tax regime is. You don't know what the tariff regime is. But you know what? The president knows that. And what troubles Canadians the most, I think, is it looks like what he's trying to do is really weaken our economy as much as he can and use economic force to weaken us. And we're not going to take that lying down. We see that happening. We don't like it. We don't want it to happen. We don't want to be at the 51st state. We want to remain an independent country. We're very proud to be Canadians. We think we have a lot to be proud of, both in our healthcare plans and the steps that we've taken to create a different kind of country north of the border that shares a lot of values and a lot of things with the United States, but still wants to be itself in the world, just like you wanted to be yourself in the world in 1775. That's what we want. We want to do it without a revolution, and we want to do it without coming to any kind of conflict. We want to settle this in a peaceful way, but we're not going to be taken advantage of. And there's a hockey expression we use, which is elbows up, elbows up. And there's a lot of that going on in Canada today. Elbows up. Let's keep sharp here.
In all of these fights against what appear to be these illegal mass firings and these efforts to unilaterally close down and turn off parts of the government, the materially most consequential one of all of them is one that was obtained because of one man whose name is Hampton Dellinger. Trump tried to fire him in the first week in February. Mr. Dellinger fought it immediately. He fought it long enough and hard enough that while he was able to retain his post, thanks to a judge's order, still under fire from Trump, he succeeded in enlisting the Merit Systems Protection Board to reverse thousands of baseless firings of so-called probationary employees. Among the direct results of what Hampton Dellinger did are more than 5,000 people at USDA who yesterday were told they must be reinstated to their jobs. Hampton Dellinger today himself announced that he is ending his one-man fight to stay at his post at the Office of Special Counsel, which looks after whistleblower rights, which looks after the rights of government employees to not be fired for corrupt or improper reasons. He left that job today after an appeals court ruling basically made clear that he must. But take him as a case study here, because his one-man, one-month fight to not go quietly saved the jobs of thousands of people who were improperly fired by Trump. And that fight set the bar and set the tone for what it means to refuse to go quietly and to make as much good trouble as you can every single day that you can for as long as you can. Joining us now for his first interview since ending this fight is Hampton Dellinger. He's now the former head of the Office of Special Counsel. Mr. Dellinger, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sorry that this was your last day.
Yeah, I'd rather be at work.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your job. Tell me what your job was.
Well, for almost a year, I was the place that if you're a federal government whistleblower and you see wrongdoing happening on your job in the government, you could come to my office and report it. I could initiate an investigation. And if you happen to be retaliated against for blowing the whistle, I could help protect you.
That job, for obvious reasons, when you think about checks and balances, is an independent job. One in which Congress created the job, yes?
50 years ago.
Congress created the job and created it in such a way that the president couldn't come in and say, I don't like what this guy is doing protecting these whistleblowers, get him out, I want my own guy in there. Specifically the design of the job, right?
That's right. And for 50 years, presidents had respected that design, had respected that there would be a limited but important role for my office and that we would have a measure of protection. So we wouldn't worry about losing our jobs when we stood up for other federal employees who are unlawfully losing their jobs.
When the president, February 7th, told you that you were fired, had you been expecting it? Did you already have a plan in place for what you would do in that moment?
Yes and no. I had seen inspectors general, really capable, hardworking IGs be ousted. I knew that there was a general view that they didn't want independent watchdogs in the executive branch, but I also knew the history of my office and that it had been around for 50 years and courts had respected that independence for 50 years. So when I got the email saying, you're fired, thank you for your service, I didn't feel like they meant it. I also didn't feel like it merited a response. So I went back and forth. And, you know, I'm someone who believes in the presidency. I want to see every American president succeed. But I also knew that my firing violated a law that had been on the books. And I just couldn't walk away in the face of that.
You fought for a solid month since that happened. Your case took one trip to the Supreme Court already, back down to lower courts. You got an adverse appeals court ruling yesterday, which led to your decision to effectively stop your fight. Did you feel like you had no choice in terms of stopping it, that there might be additional harm done to the things that you care about and that you were trying to protect if you stuck with it and kept fighting?
Certainly that was an aspect of it. I had a 3-judge panel that was somewhat conservative, and that mirrors the Supreme Court. So I knew that it could be an uphill fight, even though I disagree with the court's ruling, and I would disagree with the Supreme Court if they found my position unconstitutional. But the other issue, Rachel, is it was going to be months, maybe a year before I'd get a final answer. I'd be on the sidelines the whole time. And I've seen the damage over the past month or so that can happen in days, sometimes even hours, to these federal agencies when the laws aren't being followed. And so the idea of trying to come back in a year and fix what I think might be broken forever in terms of the independence of my agency was not something that I thought I could do.
You talk about not wanting to be on the sidelines for the duration of that kind of a fight, waiting for something to get up to and through the United States Supreme Court. What does not being on the sidelines mean? What do you plan to do now? Today's day one out of government service.
Yeah, rest maybe, but I tell you, I can't let go of yesterday. I started out in the morning and helped get 6,000 unlawfully fired federal employees their jobs back.
Yeah. And
at the end of the day, I'd lost my job. And so it was my best day at work and my worst day at work on the same day. So I'm going to hold on to that for a little bit.
Well, don't hold on to it for too long. I mean, you have seen things, the skills that got you this job in the first place and that you allowed you to perform those duties for the past year, but also what you have seen about what it means to fight. It's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you tonight, because you embody an example here of what it is to stand up and put your name as the plaintiff on that suit against the government, to stand up for the way the American people ought to be treated. We very rarely ask individual human beings to say, I, the named plaintiff, am here to stand up for the people against the government that is mistreating them. And it takes something. It takes resources. You had help in filing the suit?
I did. I had brilliant lawyers who assisted me. I got a lot of support from whistleblower advocacy groups, from military veterans groups, because a lot of my job was focused on the VA, which is why, by the way, I think it makes no sense for the president to put in the secretary of the VA. I honor his military service, but he's got a big job on his own to do. And the idea that he could be in my job investigating himself is just the essence of a conflict of interest.
Hatted the VA secretary and your job.
That is the plan as of a couple of weeks ago. But to your broader point, I'm just one person, and I was inspired by others. I saw the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York stand up and for the rule of law and not sign off on something she didn't think was right.
Danielle Sassoon, that's
yes. Right. I saw the inspectors general, who I'd worked with hand in hand for a year, being ousted, and I knew their integrity and their talents. And I feel like the easiest thing for me to do was just to follow the law. That's what I'd done every day in my job, and I knew my firing violated the law. So I just held true to that. I listened as I was thinking about whether to file the suit or not to Shelter in the Storm by Bob Dylan. And I just think for a lawyer, the shelter in the storm, in chaos and uncertainty, is the law. And that's just what I've tried to hold on to.
I have been not thinking about it in that poetic a term, but I have been thinking about the peculiar and insidious evil of arbitrary action, right? And when you got those 5,000 plus employees at USDA their jobs back, part of the reason you got them their jobs back is because they were fired for arbitrary reasons.
Right.
And we've seen that everywhere, right? We've seen that from, you see CDC employees get fired one day, rehired the next day, fired the next day, rehired the next day. And it's arbitrary action. They're being told it's for performance. It's clearly not. And there's something that's just dumb about that, but there's also something, I think, really insidious, because when the government behaves arbitrarily like that, it's telling you there's no refuge for you in the law, and there's no refuge for you in order. We will act, there will be no law and order for you. We'll use the law against you whenever we can, but there's no refuge for you there. There's nothing that you can turn to ask for fairness. And the arbitrary and misspelled and dumb and instantly retracted and reinstated and untrackable and anonymous nature of what they're doing, I feel like it gives it some of its authoritarian sort of cadence and feel.
Well, we only have a government because of laws. We have a president because of the Supreme Rule Book, the Constitution.
Yeah.
So everything is created and structured by a set of rules, a set of laws. And so that's what I think we have to hold on to. And many individuals are putting it front and center. Many individual judges are retaining the essence, I think, of what makes us America. But the other thing about federal employees, I don't want to be lost, Rachel, is that 30% of them, more than 600,000, are military veterans.
Yes.
They wore the uniform. They put their lives on the line for our country. They come back to federal service. They're nurses, they're TSA agents, they're FBI agents. And so the least we can do is treat them with respect and treat them lawfully.
Let me ask you one last question here about the law, and it is about something that happened today. There was no cabinet meeting on the president's schedule today, but he nevertheless sort of announced after the fact that there had been a cabinet meeting, and there started to emerge some reporting about what happened. The president reportedly, or at least says now, that what he told his agency heads, his cabinet officials today, is that Elon Musk can no longer order firings, that the agencies must do it themselves, and Elon Musk is only there to advise. This obviously, it cuts against what Elon Musk has been doing. There was also a strange moment in the State of the Union where the president described Elon Musk as the head of Doge, and then immediately court filings were updated to reflect that because the government had sworn to federal courts that he wasn't the head of Doge. This overall idea of firing all the probationary employees, of Elon Musk's anonymous group coming in and ordering shutdowns of agencies and firings of whole categories of people, do you think it is running into a legal cul-de-sac? Are we getting to the point where the law is going to start to trip up these efforts in a more wholesale way?
I think the law should. I think Congress should step up. You know, Congress has the power of the purse.
Yeah.
The president can reorganize government, but there are a set of rules that govern how that reorganization should take place. And all I was asking is that the rules be followed. And I think it's a simple truth, and I think it's one that courts will hold on to and vindicate, and I hope Congress does their part as well.
Hampton Dellinger, as of today, the former head of the Office of Special Counsel, and somebody whose story is going to be told for a very long time because of what you did and because of its effects. I know you have some wounds to lick and you need probably some rest, but don't go too far. The country needs you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
One of the things the Trump campaign did last year was to make sure they were vetting and recruiting only their most diehard loyalists to staff a possible future administration. And 6 weeks into that administration, we are seeing the fruits of that effort. This is Kingsley Wilson. She's the daughter of Trump media surrogate Steve Cortes. She worked at the Center for Renewing America. That's the pro-Trump think tank founded by Russ Vought. That's Trump's OMB director and, of course, the mastermind of Project 2025. After Trump was inaugurated, Wilson was sworn in as the deputy press secretary at the Pentagon. Now, that's a very public-facing job. But as multiple outlets have reported this week, her record of public statements is, well, appalling.
We've become much more democratic as our country's history has gone on, and I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing, and I think that it's kind of a rejection of what we were meant to be. For Zelensky to come to the Capitol and to ask for more money, I just think is, horrific. It's truly despicable. He should be arrested on sight. I don't want to live in a country where people are eating cats.
And what if I told you that's like her pretty soft stuff? On social media, Wilson has been a big promoter of some downright ghastly racist and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Back in 2023, the head of the Anti-Defamation League tweeted a remembrance of Leo Frank. Frank was a Jewish businessman who was lynched by a mob in Georgia over a century ago for allegedly raping and murdering a child. It was an enormous deal. In fact, that case was what spurred the creation of the ADL. Well, Wilson responded by attacking the ADL and Frank with false claims. Quote, Leo Frank raped and murdered a 13-year-old girl. He also tried to frame a black man for his crime. The ADL is despicable. As the ADL and others have pointed out, basically only like the hardest core anti-Semites and neo-Nazis believe Leo Frank was guilty. It's a theory, if you want to call it that you only find in the darkest corners of the internet. But Wilson not only did it in that post, she did it again the following year in a separate post. Like this is a real cause celeb for her. She's also tweeted support for Germany's far-right extremist party AfD. Quote, globalist elites hate AfD because they put Germans before foreign migrants and radical Islam. Ausländer raus. As Mother Jones points out, Wilson has tweeted the phrase Ausländer raus at least 4 times, including the slogan Deutschland den Deutschen, Ausländer raus. The phrase, which means Germany for Germans, foreigners out, is explicitly considered to be an extremist slogan in Germany with neo-Nazi roots. She's also tweeted, and this is a bespoke one, make Kosovo Serbia again. Kosovo is one of America's biggest allies in the Balkans. You might remember they declared their independence in 2008. They aspired to NATO membership. We have a military relationship with them. I think it's safe to say, like, basically only far-right Serbian nationalists believe Kosovo should be reabsorbed by Serbia. Oh, and also Vladimir Putin. It is a big talking point for Russia. Also for the Pentagon's new PR person, whose job is to communicate to the world about the world's most powerful military. NBC News has reached out to Kingsley Wilson, again, who works in public relations, and her new employer about all this, but Wilson and the Department of Defense did not immediately reply to NBC News requests for comment on Wilson's past posts or whether they represent the views of the Pentagon. Now, if Kingsley Wilson were, I don't know, a college president at like a small liberal arts school in America right now, Republicans would be hauling her into congressional hearings, demanding she be fired for her anti-Semitic posts and her parroting of neo-Nazi and Russian propaganda. This is a person who truly seems to be steeped in the most horrifying corners of the internet. Like, the Leo Frank thing is really...
Donald Trump is now running into what could be his biggest obstacle yet when it comes to reshaping the federal government, Medicare and Medicaid. NBC News reports that the official budget scorekeeper says there's no way Republicans can hit their budget goals and pass the bill the president wants without making significant cuts to one of those programs. Democrats insisting today that would wreck the lives of millions of Americans.
It will devastate children, devastate families, devastate people with disabilities, devastate older Americans.
There is simply no way to cut hundreds of billions of dollars in federal Medicaid funds without taking health care away from millions of Americans.
All this sets up a major battle for Republicans, and not just with Democrats, but against a coalition of more than 100 politically savvy and powerful organizations, including AARP. Joining me now is NBC's Julie Surkin on Capitol Hill and former Pennsylvania Congressman Charlie Dent, who's also executive director of the Aspen Institute Congressional Program. So, Julie, explain what Republicans are trying to do and why the math doesn't add up.
Well, the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan entity that basically verifies and validates exactly how much Congress is trying to spend, or in this case, slash, had said what many Republicans have been admitting to me all along in private, which is that there is just no way that they could get to the $1.5 trillion in cuts that is outlined in this House budget bill that is championed by not only President Trump, but Elon Musk as well, without cutting entitlements like Medicaid, like Medicare. And of course, inside that budget bill are $880 billion worth of cuts that Republicans, including Speaker Johnson, have instructed the committee that oversees Medicaid to cut. The problem here is, though, as CBO, or the Congressional Budget Office, is saying, that there is no way that the math adds up on that. It's what we've been hearing. It's what Speaker Johnson himself in some ways had admitted. He said instead of cutting entitlements, they will look at the workforce, at fraud, but that still is only a couple of $1 billion, maybe 100 or 200 at that. Again, nowhere near the amount that Trump, that Musk, that Republicans have campaigned and ran on cutting out of the deficit. And then, of course, you have moderate Republicans in the House who only voted for that first step of the House budget resolution that would eventually inform the relevant committees to write the instructions, which would then fund President Trump's agenda at the border, military, immigration, those tax cuts that he's been talking about extending. That can't even happen without the votes of all Republicans in the House. Moderate members that I spoke to said they only voted for that procedural step with the intention of negotiating away how they're going to make these cuts happen. Then you have the Senate. Senators represent entire states, so it's not just small pockets of constituents and districts they're worried about. They represent states in some cases where there's an elderly population, where people really rely on these benefits and would certainly be frustrated and angry and perhaps even vote them out and cut into their margins next time around, becoming not only a logistical and practical issue for so many people, but a political calculation as well. And it is for all these reasons why we have been saying and hearing, and now, of course, is confirmed officially, that they can't do any of these major cuts and slashes to the deficit that they're talking about without actually eating into entitlements, which President Trump himself said they're not going to do.
Julie Surkin, thank you for that. Congressman, let me play what the president said when he was asked about this last week.
Can you guarantee that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security will not be touched?
Yeah, I mean, I have said it so many times, you shouldn't be asking me that question. Okay? This will not be read my lips. There won't be read my lips anymore. We're not going to touch it. Now, we are going to look for fraud. I'm sure you're okay with that, like people that shouldn't be on, people that are illegal aliens and others. criminals in many cases. You have a lot of fraud. But no, we're not doing anything on that.
So the president says, well, but maybe fraud. Speaker Johnson has talked about reducing inefficiencies. From your time in government, is there any way there's enough waste or fraud in these programs to fill a $300 billion gap?
No, I don't see how they get the $300 billion on waste, fraud, and abuse. And, of course, there's no such thing as a waste, fraud, and abuse line item anywhere in the federal budget. If there were, it'd be really easy, but there's not. But remember what happened in 2017 during the Obamacare repeal-replace debate. At that time, when I was serving, there were also proposals to significantly change Medicaid with block grants and per capita grants. I voted against it, but it was enormously disruptive. And they couldn't pass it then with a much larger majority. I don't see how they could possibly pass $880 billion in cuts, many of which would have to come out of Medicaid. I don't see how they can do it with this razor-thin majority in the House. And by the way, the Senate did not adopt that same approach in their budget resolution. So the House and the Senate still aren't able to agree on how to instruct these committees of jurisdiction to do their work.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see also what happens if it comes to a vote. 18 million Americans just over age 50 rely on Medicaid for everything from doctor's visits to prescription medication. The Economic Policy Institute wrote in part, these cuts will greatly increase hardship and misery for already struggling families. Kids will grow up less healthy and poorer, and they will make a future recession far more likely. They say even if it results in tax cuts for other Americans, it's, quote, a terrible trade. So I guess the big question is, are there Republicans who are willing to make that trade?
Well, I do think there are some, but I don't think there are going to be enough. I think there are going to be enough Republicans in the House and probably in the Senate who are not going to be able to vote for these types of Medicaid cuts. And remember, too, take a state like West Virginia. When Medicaid was expanded under Obamacare, I think about 300,000 people were added to the Medicaid rolls in West Virginia. That was I think almost 10%, or a little over 10% of the entire state population. So making these changes, it sounds easy on paper, but there are people involved. And I got in a big argument with Donald Trump over this in 2017 in the White House, kind of like the Zelensky meeting where he started berating me because I told him things he didn't want to hear about Medicaid and how it was going to impact people. And that's what's going to happen here. These members are going to hear from their constituents. They're going to say it's too much because so many people right now are dependent on Medicaid, and especially many elderly who exhaust their assets or are in nursing homes. They are also very dependent on Medicaid, in addition to those who are low-income people who are not elderly.
Yeah, there also was this little exchange in a meeting. Republicans gave Elon Musk an idea. Take all the cuts he's making, send them to Congress as a package, and then they'll help him make them permanent because, of course, he doesn't have any real supposed power. Take a listen to Senator Lindsey Graham about this.
We need to capture this in a legislative process to make it real.
Did Musk say he would do that?
He was like so happy. He didn't know it. I mean, he didn't know. I mean, that's not his job, really. Legislatively, I think he found out today that rescission is a tool available with 51 votes to lock in the cuts. And he was doing like this. Let's use it.
And when he apparently said he was doing like this, he was doing a little dance. What are the implications of this? And do you see that happening?
Well, I think I'll give Lindsey Graham credit for being transparent and at least honest about this. At some point, if we want to shutter departments, if we want to cut spending in Washington, well, there's a way to do that. The Republicans have the majority in the House and in the Senate. Introduce legislation and codify this. Put these DOGE cuts into the bills and then have up or down votes and see how it goes. I personally, I don't think the votes are there to pass many of these cuts. But the way it's supposed to be done is through Congress. And I think that's what Lindsey Graham is saying. And Congress needs to reinsert itself because right now, Congress's Article I authorities are being trampled. Their power of the purse authority is being trampled by the executive branch with this overreach. And, of course, we're witnessing many cases that are winding their way through the courts, including the Supreme Court, about what the role of Congress is in this process.
Congressman Charlie Dunn, always good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
We're taking a closer look at President Trump's joint address to Congress. Steve Ratner is back with more fact checks. There are a lot, Steve. First up, President Trump doubled down on one of his biggest campaign promises, which is making his 2017 tax cuts permanent. Watch.
We're seeking permanent income tax cuts all across the board. And to get urgently needed relief to Americans hit especially hard by inflation, I'm calling for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security benefits for our great seniors. And I also want to make interest payments on car loans tax deductible, but only if the car is made in America.
Okay. So, Steve, you say that's impossible to do with the House Republicans' budget proposal.
Yeah, look, Trump hands out tax cuts like they were Halloween candy, but then at some point, you got to deal with the reality of what that all adds up to. So let's take a look at the reality. The chickens are coming home to roost on that. So he's talking about no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, no tax on tips, no tax on interest loans on cars made here. These are billions and billions of dollars of tax cuts. Simply extending his existing tax cuts, the ones that he passed in 2017, down here, would cost over $4 trillion. The House Budget Committee has only allocated $4.5 trillion for all the tax cuts. So you could do this, which he's completely committed to, but how the rest of this happens, including a full deduction of the state and local taxes, it is impossible. This is almost $8 trillion worth of tax cuts. So this is an empty promise. Can't happen, won't happen.
And one of the things that drew, well, let's say shock, surprise, some mockery from the address the other night was President Trump, given what you've laid out there, promising to balance the budget. Here's that moment from the address.
And in the near future, I want to do what has not been done in 24 years, balance the federal budget. We're going to balance it.
Steve, how does he plan to do that?
Well, first of all, in his first term, he planned not only to balance the budget, but to pay off all the national debt. That didn't work so well. He added a ton of national debt. But let's look at how it isn't going to work this time. So we are looking in what we call a base case without anything else happening. We're looking at deficits a bit below $2 trillion, going all the way up to $3 trillion over the next 10 years. A total already, these dark green bars, of $20 trillion of additional debt. The budget plan that I just described would add another roughly $2.5 trillion of debt. So instead of balancing the budget and paying down the debt, he's creating more deficits, all these deficits, and adding $22.5 trillion to the debt.
All right. So President Trump addressed tariffs the other day and said they would be positive for the auto industry.
Deals are being made. Never seen. That's a combination of the election win and tariffs. It's a beautiful word, isn't it? That, along with our other policies, will allow our auto industry to absolutely boom. It's going to boom. Spoke to the majors today, all three, the top people, and they're so excited.
Tariffs, he deems a beautiful word. At other times, he said it's his favorite word. And Steve, but we also know yesterday, he's already backed off some of the tariffs for the auto industry. What do your charts say?
Well, he may think it's a beautiful word. He may think the auto industry is going to boom. Neither the auto companies nor the stock market see it that way. So here's a chart of stock prices for Ford and General Motors since the inauguration day compared to the overall market. The overall market, we know, has come down, still up here. Ford and General Motors kind of went off a cliff after inauguration, down 10% for General Motors, about 7.5% for Ford. And here's a quote from the Ford CEO before yesterday: tariffs will blow a hole in the industry that we have never seen. And so he said in his speech just now that he had spoken to all three automakers and they were happy. Well, a day later, they called the White House and said, no, we're really not so happy. We need you to at least pause these tariffs and hopefully get rid of them.
So Trump also touched on how tariffs, a different set of tariffs, may affect America's farm workers. Let's listen to some of that.
Our new trade policy will also be great for the American farmer. I love the farmer. Who will now be selling into our home market, the USA, because nobody is going to be able to compete with you.
He later said that farmers go have fun, but Steve, you say that they'll lose a huge market to actually sell their goods.
Well, he may love the farmers. I'm not so sure they love him at the moment. Let's just go back to Trump 1 for a second, because he also put tariffs on, as you remember then, and there were retaliatory tariffs. In 2018 and 19, the government collected a total of $50 billion from all the tariffs that we imposed on things coming into this country. We then gave back $24.5 billion to the farmers to compensate them for their lost exports. So that did not go so well. Let's see why. We export a huge amount of soybeans, 7.7 billion, and even more of corn, 13.1 billion. We export virtually none of it. So if we lose these exports, this stuff stays in the American market. Americans are already buying all the soybeans and corn they want to buy. So I don't really see how this is great for American farmers, how this sort of allows them to, quote, sell things at home when we're already selling everything we can at home and sending the rest of it overseas as one of our major exports.
So let's keep going with this. President Trump also the other night slammed U.S. aid to Ukraine during his address to Congress.
We've spent perhaps $350 billion, like taking candy from a baby. That's what happened. And they've spent $100 billion. What a difference that is.
Before we get to your charts, we should note, of course, the next day, the Trump administration paused intel sharing with Ukraine. And what's happened since? Russia has only increased its bombardment of Ukrainian cities. Now, Ukraine tries to defend itself with less information. But, Steve, turning back to what the president said the other night, talk to us there about your chart.
This is one of the most weird and surprising ones, Jonathan. He's used those figures over and over and over again. He's been corrected by me and 100 other people over and over and over again, and he still keeps using it. So we'll try one more time. Maybe he's watching. Maybe someone will finally get him to say what is actually true. He claims $350 billion spent by the U.S. in Ukraine. The real number, $120 billion, and as you say, paused. And just to make a mention, the reason this line isn't as continuous as this line is because of huge fights in the U.S. over aid to Ukraine, a lot of opposition. Eventually, we did do it. Europe, $138 billion, more than us, not $100 billion as he claimed. And by the way, Europe at the moment is putting together a massive amount of additional aid. And as you just alluded to, we are cutting back on what we are doing for the Ukrainians.
And lastly, President Trump touted Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency during his address. Here's what Trump claimed.
We found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud.
All right, Steve, has Doge found anywhere near as much fraud as Trump claims?
Well, it was kind of mind-numbing the other night to listen to Trump list those programs one by one that he's found, and you make fun of them and so forth. They were only in the millions of dollars. And when you actually add up everything Doge has claimed, and also the Doge reality, you get to a very different picture. So on February 17th, Doge claimed that they had found $8.5 billion, not hundreds of billions, $8.5 billion of savings. I'm not going to go through this whole chart, but basically a bunch of that stuff just disappeared from their website, $2.7 billion here, for example. And when you get down to the bottom, at the moment anyway, all Doge is claiming is $2.3 billion from contracts that have been terminated and another $2.5 billion that they say they're in the middle of doing. And so $4.8 billion of total fraud, so-called fraud or contracts canceled, so forth, less than what they said at the beginning, and obviously just like the tiniest little fraction of what Trump claims they have found.
Just a great fact check, point by point, from Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner. Steve, thanks so much as always.